If you're a woman with ADHD and you struggle to get yourself to do stuff, this episode is for you. One of the main things my clients struggle with is getting themselves to do stuff. And there's so many things that can be behind that. And so I want us to chat a little bit about that today, as well as some things that we can do in order to help ourselves. Be sure to listen. Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self-Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm glad you're here because I'm here to talk about something that impacts so many of us women with ADHD. And even if we found good ways around it, sometimes we can still struggle. What is that thing? It's task management, getting ourselves to do stuff. Some of us spend an inordinate amount of time organizing ourselves, that would be me, and having systems, and those things are great. People like me need to figure out ways to have more fun and do those kind of things. But what I hear most from my clients is just not being able to get themselves to do stuff. And there's a lot of things that I hear people talking about. Procrastination is a big one. Task paralysis is another. Fear, right? There's fear of making a mistake, fear of failure, fear of haters, especially if you're an online entrepreneur like me. Even fear of success, because if we succeed, then what? Like we might disappoint the customers that we've invited into our business. And so there's so many different pieces that can get in the way of getting ourselves to do stuff. And I want to talk about that today because bottom line, what this comes down to is how our ADHD brains are wired. One big piece of it that we are getting more and more information about, neuroscience is still learning so much about the human brain, and neurodivergence, especially what it looks like in women, is grossly understudied. But what they're starting to find is that due to our brains not having access to enough norepinephrine, or noradrenaline it's also called, and dopamine, we struggle with executive function. So the good news is there are ways that we can increase our brain's access to dopamine and norepinephrine. Now, ADHD medication specifically targets these issues, and so that's one option. But not everyone wants to take medication or maybe even needs to, especially if you have a milder case of ADHD or you have skills that you're able to function well and still have fun, right? Because a lot of us who've done well in our lives, and well, I mean, what does that mean? But a lot of us who've been able to get advanced degrees or somehow made it through our career in a way that we wanted to, that's great. But if all of our free time is going to our functioning, then our ADHD is still negatively impacting us, right? So there are ways besides medication or in addition to medication that we can more naturally increase our access to things like dopamine and norepinephrine. So I want to talk about those. And these are things that you've heard of and you'll be like, oh, Jen, I know. Everyone always talks about this. But I think the reason people talk about these things is because they work. And the problem is when we hear them, if we're not doing them, isn't that we don't think they work. It's that we don't know how to get ourselves to do them, which is what we're going to talk about today. So keep listening after this. But the number one thing that can help us is exercise. It helps boost both norepinephrine and dopamine. And for the regular person, it's great for mental, emotional health as well as physical health. For the ADHD brain, exercise or physical movement is essential. I find that it helps me so much. I've been exercising regularly since I was 16 and was a very active child in dance and softball and a little bit soccer, although I was very bad at soccer. But anyway, that activity helps have greater access to those chemicals and then helps us function better, right? Another one is sleep. And you know this is true because if you've ever not gotten a good night's sleep or not gotten a few good nights sleep, like I had for the past 2 weeks until a couple nights ago, your ADHD seems worse. It's like, oh my gosh, why is it so much worse? It's because you're not getting enough sleep or you're not sleeping well. Sleep is essential for our ADHD brains to function. I mean, most people need it, but those of us with ADHD, it's like barely able to function without it. You know, it's funny, before I fully grasped that I had ADHD, because I went undiagnosed for years, and even when I had an assessment, they were like, oh, you've got such good coping, you don't quite struggle enough anymore, essentially, right? How many of us have heard that? Especially if we're we're overachievers, we've had a lot of accomplishments. It can definitely make it tricky for people to see that we have ADHD. But anyway, I'm off the rails. But what I was going to say is for years, I would say, gosh, I can't imagine myself having kids because I need my sleep to function. And everyone's like, oh, you get used to it. And I always thought to myself, there is no way in heck I could get myself to do anything, let alone parent, in any kind of kind, compassionate way if I wasn't getting sleep. So sleep is really, really, really essential when it comes to helping our ADHD. Another helpful thing is making small accomplishments. So this is why we want to start small. So remember how we said the problem isn't exercise. It's not like, I don't want to exercise. Chances are there are ways you like to move your body. It might not be the ways that you go to a gym and you lift weights, or it might not be those pre-prescribed ways, but there are probably ways that you enjoy moving your body once you're doing it, and it probably feels better. I think the thing a lot of people get tripped up around exercise is they struggle to do it, so they think they don't actually like the exercise. Our bodies love to move. And so some of it is just finding the physical movement we like. And this is the small win piece, starting small, right? Laura Vanderkam talks about a better than nothing goal. And, she was trying to start running every day. And for a runner, a mile isn't that far. If you're not a runner, you're like, a mile. But if you're a runner or have run in your life, a mile really isn't that far. And so she's like, no matter what, I can run a mile a day. 10, 12 minutes max is what that takes for a runner. And so she, no matter what was going on, she could always get herself to run a mile. Then she would sometimes run longer than that, but she was always able to get herself to do that 1 mile. So we can do the same, whether it's trying to get ourselves to exercise, trying to get ourselves to go to bed at a decent time. It might even be trying to post content for our business rather than being like, I need to post 5 times a day, or I need to send out a weekly email. It's really important that we start small and maybe have that better than nothing goal. And then we can add on to it on days when we're having more of a high energy day, right? If we're having a low energy day, posting 5 times, I don't know about you, but that is never going to happen, right? That's just like crazy talk right there. So some of it is honoring our pace, but then also celebrating those small wins, because when we push ourselves to do too much and then we're not getting it done, then we feel like we're failing, which just reinforces that early messaging most of us probably got, because of our ADHD, that we weren't reaching our full potential, or we weren't working hard enough, or we just needed to try harder, or we needed to do more. Whatever the message was, when we put too much on our plate and then can't do it, then we end up reinforcing those messages that I'm a failure, I can't do stuff, when the reality is you just put too much on your plate. So try to start small and celebrate the small wins along the way. It's a really, really helpful way to be able to get yourself to do stuff. And then each task doesn't feel so daunting, like it's this big, heavy thing. Another thing that you're going to be like, oh, Jen, I have ADHD. I can't do that. Everyone talks about it, but come on. Yep, it's meditation. So I've been meditating since I was 24, kind of sporadically for the first, maybe 10-ish years. And I did a lot of mindfulness meditation back then. I was an indoor cycling instructor and a runner at the time. So I would be mindful as I was placing my feet or, putting my foot on the pedal or whatever it was, right? And notice my breath. So we can do things like mindfulness meditation. We don't have to sit on a meditation cushion. Now I could do like a whole workshop on meditation for ADHD, but the one thing I'll say that I think can help the most is stop worrying about your thoughts. Everyone's always like, but my thoughts are so busy. The point of meditation is not to stop your thoughts. Your thoughts are there. In fact, with ADHD, I find it's a way for them to let them be. And then because they've been heard, they just kind of pass by. The other thing about it is that everybody thinks. Like that's what our brains like to do. And so Jon Kabat-Zinn talks about if our brains were just fully clear in this deep meditative state every single time we meditated, our brains wouldn't get better at paying attention through meditation, but they do. And the reason our brains get better at paying attention, better at focusing, better at getting ourselves to do stuff is because every time we notice our attention has gone off on something else, we go, oh, thinking, or oh, off track, whatever it is. And we bring our focus or our attention back to the object of our meditation, whether that's our breath, a mantra, staring at a candle, if you like Tridaka meditation, whatever it is. And that might happen almost constantly during meditation. But that's not wrong. That's actually what's building our brain's ability to pay attention. The other thing is some people will be like, yeah, well, I can sit for 5-10 minutes and my brain, I never even notice I'm off the rails. That's okay. Do it as soon as you notice. So whether it's once the meditation timer bell goes off at the end, or it's 2 days later, oh yeah, I didn't bring my focus back to my breath. Do it. And then every time, as soon as you notice that your focus is off, bring it back, bring it back. That practice and then backing it up closer to the event will actually help you be able to pay attention better, not just on your meditation cushion, because that's not like the point necessarily. There's lots of reasons people meditate, but if you're doing it for your ADHD, being, totally focused and deeply meditative the whole time is often not even the goal, if there's a goal, right? Totally, I'm off track right now. So I'm going to notice I'm off track and I'm going to come back. Sometimes taking a breath can help us do that. So meditation is one of those things that can help our focus, and it builds our access to norepinephrine and dopamine in the brain, those things that help with executive functioning and that most of us with ADHD are really deficient in. Now, here's a fun one that everyone's going to be like, finally, something that's easy. A lot of these other things I've recommended are simple. It's just not always easy. But this one is simple and easy, and it's music. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but us ADHD folks love our music. We feel it so deeply. At least a lot of us do. The ones I know do. That's, I think, why I'm so into dance fitness. I do Zumba and bar and things like that. Or when I'm lifting weights, I have to have music on because it's the music that moves me. And so if you can find a way to get access to music when you're struggling to get yourself together to do stuff, that can sometimes pump you up to get you there. All right, so shifting gears, one of the things that I hear that kind of between the lines, because very few people want to admit that they don't feel like it or it's not fun when they're trying to get themselves to do stuff, especially for their business, right? Or their kids. But a lot of times, part of our issue with ADHD is because of our deficient dopamine and norepinephrine, we're seeking those activities that could increase it. So things that are kind of a drag or not fun or just not our wheelhouse, are so hard to get ourselves to do. And it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to admit that we don't want to do it because it's not fun. Because a lot of times we were told when we were young, well, if you can pay attention to this thing you like, then you should be able to pay attention to this thing that you don't. And that's actually false for the ADHD brain, right? I think most of us know that. I think we didn't have the language as children to explain that to the people who are shaming us, but a lot of us know that we have to have an interest in it. And so there's some ways that we can create interest, or if we don't have interest, do something else. And I want to talk about that next. So one of the things that is essential for people in general, but especially people with ADHD, is to get very clear on your values. So, in my work with clients, I walk them through a values exercise to identify their top 3 values. Mine are learning and growth, which you probably get, health and wellness, Also, probably pretty obvious. And then my last one is wholehearted living. Now, that one's kind of a cheat one for me because I use Brene Brown's term for wholehearted living, which also includes compassion and curiosity and gratitude. All those things are important to me, right? So that one's a little bit of a cheat, but it was on her list. And so there's exercises we can do to come up with our main values. The reason that's important is we get asked to do stuff all the time, especially as women and especially as ADHD women who may have been masking our ADHD by being yes people. I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Like in order to kind of hide that we don't have our shit together sometimes, we're like, yeah, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that to help people out and see how valuable we are until we overload ourselves to the point of ridiculousness. And then we start to not be able to function, right? And so the reason this is so important is if we're clear on our values, that helps us get clear on our priorities, both for how we want to spend our time, but also what we want to say yes to others. And it helps us know what to say no to. So there are things that, I really value those top 3 things, but there are other things I value. But if there's something else I want to do and it's in conflict with one of those main values, I sometimes I won't do it, right? And this is especially true in business where we need to show up as our authentic selves because as the business owner, as the entrepreneur, we are the light that attracts people to us, right? So we need to be showing up as our authentic, transparent selves. And so when we're, forcing ourselves to do stuff that we hate, that's going to come across. People are going to catch that. It's going to be obvious. And it's simple stuff. Like I used to do all my TikToks and video recordings with my hair perfectly done and makeup. And guess what? Do you know how much in my real life I actually do my hair and makeup? Probably straighten my hair once a week, wash it and let it go curly another day, and the rest is just kind of back or whatever. And I never do my makeup. And so it's like, show up authentically because then you'll attract the audience that's like, yeah, you're my people, I'm your people. So all of that can come from getting clear on your values, right? If beauty and fashion are at the top of your values list, then you're probably going to want to do your hair and makeup. So it's not a moral judgment if your values are good or bad, but it's just getting clear on what those values are right now in your life, what your current life priorities are. And, priority used to be singular. It was meant to be priority, as in we only have one priority. But there, came a time, I can't remember who I read this from, if it was just one of the big business guys, if it was Adam Grant or Jim Collins or something, but they pointed out that there came a time when we changed it to priorities so that there's more than one thing we're focusing on. And so now we might feel more overloaded because we've added so many things to our plate. So it can really help everyone, but especially people with ADHD, to get clarity around what are our main priorities, what are our main values, so that way we can say no and stop overloading our plates with stuff that we're just never going to be able to do. Because let's face it, it's time that we radically accept and love ourselves for how our ADHD is. And there are amazing creative things we can do that other people can't do because of our ADHD. And it takes us longer to do stuff. A lot of times we can't get as much done as people who don't have ADHD because we have task paralysis that pops up. I painted my garage gym that I was talking about, and it's funny. It should only take me a couple hours to paint the ceiling, but just the task of getting myself out there, and I was just kind of doing a bunch of little crap, kind of fiddling around, and that in and of itself took 30 minutes. But I wasn't actually doing anything. I was, when I was a kid, it was called stalling. But what I actually think it was is just my ADHD, hey, I don't want to do this not fun task. So maybe it'll go away. And it kind of took me that long inside to convince myself that, you know what? I want the nice garage gym and I don't have money to pay someone for it right now. So if it's to be, it's up to me. So here we go. It helped that I have a deadline of teaching my trauma sensitive yoga class in there for the first time last Saturday. So that really helped motivate me to get it done. But the point is, we have these different ways of being in the world, and we keep trying to fit our star ADHD peg into the square hole of society, and it doesn't work. And so instead of taking on all this stuff that, maybe your sister or brother or sister-in-law or colleague can do, but with our ADHD brains, there's just some stuff that we can't do. And a lot of times it's going to be the stuff that sucks. And there'll probably be people around us who are like, oh, must be nice. I don't like to clean either, but I can't afford a housekeeper. And for some of us, I don't have a housekeeper. That's probably one of the first things I'll hire, though, when I have a little more income coming in. But for people with ADHD, it's not like I could do that so I can do more fun things. A lot of times for us to delegate tasks, it's so we can actually get the rest of our shit done, because our task list oftentimes can't have the same amount of tasks on it as someone who's very similar to us but doesn't have ADHD. That doesn't mean we're bad. It's just in this society where so much value is based on how much we produce and like quantity, it can make us look like we're bad, but we're not. We offer a lot of amazing things through our ADHD gifts. It's just a matter of when we can accept ourselves and embrace that and love ourselves, like not just accept, but love ourselves in all of our ADHD goodness and the hard times. Then we can show up more confidently in saying, that's not in my wheelhouse, or, I really need to focus on these priorities right now. I'm not going to be able to do that, both to others, but also in our brain. Because I don't know about you, but my ADHD brain is like, I could totally do this thing, and especially if you're at like Menards or the craft store, you're like, and you just start buying a bunch of crap. Or as a business owner, I'm like, I totally, you know what? I should do a video series. I should do this. Ooh, a secret podcast sounds fun. And we get so excited in the idea generating, which is like our brains are awesome at that. But sometimes when the metal needs to hit the road, that's where we struggle. And so it's important that we don't make it hard for ourselves or harder than it has to be by putting too many things on that road. You know what I mean? So instead of saying yes to everything, both inside of ourselves and to others, and then not being able to do all of it and then feeling like a failure, reinforcing those messages, if we can focus on the things that we actually need to do, we're more likely to get them done. And because we have those wins, feel more confident that we have our shit together. Because we do have our shit together. It's just sometimes it doesn't look like it because we haven't been following our own values and priorities, and we've been giving too much to other people, which a lot of times is an ADHD way of masking. I'm just saying. So the other thing I want to talk about when it comes to tasks is with a specific task, right? The values and priorities are more about, when things come to us. But when we have a task on our plate and we're having a hard time getting ourselves to do it, or it's just kind of been on our list and we keep just forwarding it along every day, one of the things that's essential is to look at that task and say, why do I need to do this task? Why do I want to do this task? Why did I assign myself this task? Why did I agree to this task? Why now? And why me? Because sometimes when we're procrastinating, it's not that we're being lazy. A lot of us procrastinate to get the adrenaline to get our butts in motion, right? But another reason is because there's something else going on. Sometimes we procrastinate tasks that we really don't even need to do, right? So there's some things that just go away. Now, sometimes when things go away, they create a bigger problem, right? Like if we're like, I've got a leak in that part of my ceiling. If I don't do anything about it and just put a bucket under it, it'll go away. Well, if you live in Minnesota or somewhere where there's a lot of humidity, a leak can create a mold problem, which is then a bigger problem to deal with, right? So there's those kind of things that we can ignore that don't go away, but there's some stuff that just does. I can't think of anything right now. And of course, the harder I try and think about it, the more my brain is like, I can't. All that's coming to me is I remember whenever I quit jobs, I would feel, or moved on. It wasn't like I just randomly quit, but when I got another position, I always felt good because my to-do list slate was clean. There was nothing else I had to do at that job. It was like, okay, I didn't get that shit done. I guess it's no longer my problem. Maybe that's why I'm self-employed. But in all seriousness, though, there are some things that we just don't need to do. And so if we're procrastinating, it's not that we're bad or lazy. Sometimes there's a reason we're procrastinating that's over and above using the adrenaline to get ourselves in motion. So when you catch yourself not being able to get yourself to do something, ask the question, why do I think I need to do this? Why does it have to happen now, or does it? And does it have to be me? Because sometimes we can delegate things. And, this is something we can talk about a whole nother podcast, but sometimes we need to hire assistants, like a VA or something to help us do stuff. Or, maybe your kid, I don't know, whatever you got going on. But sometimes we need to hire a housekeeper. And I know that sounds crazy. You're like, I don't have money for that. But sometimes we can't make the money until we do the hire because there's just too much that we have to do that like really legitimately does need to be done that we just can't get ourselves to do. And some of it's because our task list is too long. And some of it is because the stuff on that list is not designed for us. There's some stuff on there that is, and there is some that just isn't. Like I love making podcasts. I love working with clients. I love teaching and doing workshops and webinars. I'm not a super huge fan of making little posts for Instagram using Canva. Like I don't mind it, but it just, oh my gosh, it's so much. Or like posting all the things that I make on social media. So that needs to go to a VA. So it's important that we're doing that. Otherwise, we're not going to get the stuff done that we need in our business or at home. And if you're a parent, kids need to learn how to do shit around the house. Like they just do. So they grow up to be responsible adults. So it's not bad to get your kids to help around the house. You're actually teaching them how to contribute to a household and how to be a grown adult. And I'm not suggesting that you give your kids tasks that aren't age appropriate. Don't give your 4-year-old knives. That wouldn't be okay. But a lot of times kids can do more than we think. I remember I worked in technically it was like a daycare, I guess, but child development center. I was a military family life counselor teaching social skills to kids in vitro. And I think in vitro is the word I want. Anyway, while I was there were 18-month-old kids who they would take their lunch tray, and they would walk over and they would dump the food into one bin. They would put the tray in another one that had soap in it and put the silverware in another one. And then they go back and like sit on the carpet or whatever for like to get ready for reading time before nap time. They were 18 months old. So there is stuff we can delegate. And if you're not a mom, I'm sorry, but there are also sometimes I think we don't trust the people we hire. And then there's something to think about too. Like, why don't we trust them? Are they the right person? Is it our own stuff like control issues, perfectionism? So there's some deeper stuff to look at there. So delegating is hugely important, as is getting clear on your why. All right, last but not least, I saved the biggest one for last, is fear. Everyone's got fear. No one doesn't have fear. Michelle Obama talks about her fear in her podcast. Beyonce talks about her fear, right? She's got Sasha Fierce, who she was her like alter ego who would go on stage for her because she was afraid. All of us got fear. And some people are willing to talk about it and some people aren't willing to talk about it, but we all have it. And that fear can be about many, many things. Sometimes we're afraid of failure. Sometimes we're afraid of success, right? Like success, if we were to sell out a program or something, would mean then we have customers who might be disappointed in us, or we have more work to do, right? That's another thing with ADHDers. We have more work to do. And so there can even be fear of success. There can be fear of haters. There's fear about just about anything. And the answer to fear, this is a much more complex thing to talk about and something I work with my clients on, but the answer to fear isn't ignoring it or pushing it down Or I'm just going to feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, I guess feel the fear. But fear is there for a reason. It's our brain or body's way of saying, yoo-hoo, something's up here. Something's off. Now, sometimes what's off is we're stuck in our fight or flight response from whatever kind of trauma we've experienced. If we have complex trauma, that's a bigger thing. But even, growing up ADHD, any of you like me, undiagnosed and in a world not designed for us, that creates an enormous amount of fear that we're going to get shamed and in trouble for not doing it the right way or like everyone else, right? In 8th grade, I was put on the chalkboard ledge for an entire class because I was talking. Now, I mean, you're probably like, oh my God, that's horrible. Yes, it was horrible, but it's also funny to think about. It was horrible. But I was so terrified of messing up because the consequences for us ADHDers in our time of growing up was pretty steep. So a lot of times we have so much fear from that and trauma from that we might end up vacillating between our fight or flight response and our shutdown response. Not to mention that a lot of us use our fight or flight response, right? That adrenaline, that anxiety to get ourselves to do stuff when we procrastinate. So it's really important that, number one, to address our fear, we're leaning in and getting curious about it and understanding it and validating, yeah, you know what? Of course I'm afraid. I'm coming by this honestly. And then working with that fear to figure out what do I need to do to be able to, move past this or, honor the fear, but also be like, you know what? I got this. I will tell you the two things that help me with that is, one, I believe everything is learning. I remember going through my divorce. This was 20 plus years ago. And I remember sitting there, in my wedding dress, because that's how I dealt with that. Is I was sitting in my wedding dress and my tiara on the floor crying with my cats. And I remember sitting there going, and I was 27, 28, going, wow, I don't know what I'm supposed to learn from this, but I'm supposed to learn something. And just staying open to that learning made me a lot less scared. And so a lot of times, if we can just trust that there's learning inside of it, doesn't mean it's fun, right? Even when something worse, my mom died 4 years ago and I couldn't quite go there right away. I wasn't like, oh, I'm learning something from this. I had parts of me that were like, F you, Jen. F you, learning, Jen. But eventually that came, that I learned from that too. And even within 3 or 4 months, I was able to say, this is painful. This is not our first choice. We don't want this. And we can't control it. But you know what? We're already learning stuff. And we're going to learn so much more. So sometimes trusting that the pain or whatever it is we go through is just part of life. Failure isn't failure. Failure is life lessons. So if we can redefine that, and embrace challenges as learning opportunities, we can start to overcome some of that fear. The other thing is working to build trust in ourselves that no matter what, we're going to be okay. And this is a tough one, especially if you have complex trauma. Could be a very hard one for you if you've never really felt okay. So this is outside of the scope of this podcast. If you've got that, definitely talk to a therapist if you're not already in with a trauma therapist. But a lot of us, if we don't have complex trauma, that daily abuse that was just so intense or severe, extreme trauma, things like that, we can build trust in ourselves that, you know what? I can handle this. I'm going to be okay. I've handled things before. It's Glennon Doyle. She talks about we can do hard things. And it's all of that. It's recognizing that, you know what? You can do hard things. We all can. We can do hard things and we're going to be okay. What happens might not be our first choice, but we're going to learn something and we're going to be okay. So hopefully this helped you get to a place of okay, these are some of the things I need to do to get myself to do stuff. And the biggest piece I hope you take from this is that all of this is learning. And if we can lean in with curiosity and build our self-awareness, that's going to help us tenfold, a millionfold, whatever. because then we're going to be able to pay attention to what's happening and kind of, I don't like the word self-correct because it's like, oh, what I was doing was bad, but kind of like self-adjust is maybe what I like better, and do something different. So if you're not already, I'd love it if you'd subscribe or follow wherever you're watching this, and please share. Take care.